Dumelang ka leina la Morena. Well, I want to say all protocol has been observed, but I want to greet my dear wife who is here with us and acknowledge Baba re tisitseng hano Moruti Phaphe le Mamoruti Phaphe. I acknowledge you and the father and the mother of the house, Bora Bawasi. And I think with that I can say all protocol observed. Amen. Amen. Right. I've been given strict instructions by the former teacher to talk on 15 minutes about the brain and what its functions are. And I'm glad that I can see a good number of scientists around who will later, modify and make better what I have said. I want to look at the brain in relation to imagination, but also add the term or the word intention to it. Because as I went through scientific journals or articles, the word that I found very commonly used is the word intentions. And it's highly and closely related to imagination. So, but I'll start off by looking at the brain, because it all starts in the brain. And I have given a verse which will also guide me as a pastor so that I have my footing. Proverbs chapter 4 verse 23, which I'm going to read at the end. I'll start off with the brain. All of us know that we have the brains in our skulls, and that brain has got many functions. And I've been given strict instructions to make sure that I speak in terms that are, everybody can understand. So, which means I will try to put it down to our level and avoid a lot of scientific jargons. So, some of the functions of the brain include the following, what we call sensory processing, which include touch, pain, temperature. They process visual information, hearing, smell, taste. I think all those things you do, but you don't know they come from the brain. It's also responsible for motor control, which is basically the control of voluntary movement. Voluntary movement, it means all the movements that you make intentionally. That's why in science we use the word intention. Also responsible for language and communication, speech production, as well as language comprehension. It's also responsible for cognitive function, which include thinking, reasoning, decision making, problem solving, and planning. I think a lot of people think they plan through their certificates, but you plan through your mind, your brain. It's also responsible for memory and learning. It's also responsible for emotion and behavior. And the brain, in short, regulates emotions. Then I'm talking about the brain when you cut it in half this way. Like scientists, they call it sections. You section the brain this way. You have two sides of the brain, the right and the left side of the brain. So normally, I enjoy looking at the brain in that manner. Other scientists look at it differently. So I'm going to be talking about the brain when you cut it in half like this. And one of the parts, that is the biggest part of the brain, is called the cerebral hemisphere. I'm sorry, I can't change this one for now. And the cerebral hemisphere has got different sections. And to avoid a lot of jargon, I'll just talk about some of the areas within this hemisphere. The hemisphere has got two halves, which is the left and the right. And as we all know, the right controls the left side of our body, and the left controls the right side of our body. So the first one, we call it the primary sensory area, which receives impulses from areas of sensory receptors and most parts of the body. When in science, when we talk of a receptor, we talk of any sense in our body where we are able to detect that something is happening. We can detect heat, we can detect speech, we can detect sound, etc. Then the second part, we call it the motor area, which controls movement, like we said. Then we also have the left hemisphere, which is mainly responsible for language and communication. I'm going to talk a little later about a study that was done on this area. When this side gets injured, normally our speech also gets impaired in one way or another. We also have the visual association area. I'm speaking jargon, but just listen. That is how complex God has created our brain. And it processes vision, that is our visual information. The brain is like a computer. Everything that it receives, it's encoded and decoded. In other words, it receives it as a signal, which is in electric form, and then it changes it or converts it to something that can be tangible, that we can all understand. In other words, the brain does not receive sound just the same way we receive it. We receive it as noise, but it receives it as electrical impulses. And then it encodes it, and then it decodes it. Decodes it means it interprets it. Then it's also, there's an area which will be the area that will take us to now imagination, association area. And before I go further, I want to acknowledge my father.